Swan. I call the member for Dawson.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do rise to speak on the latest artwork the Treasurer has created for us, his sixth and hopefully final budget. And when the Treasurer actually stood up in Parliament and gave his budget speech, I really thought that he should have been wearing the top hat, complete with the rabbit, perhaps the deck of cards in the pocket, white gloves, a pigeon cage, and the saw and box for the assistant there, because this is probably the greatest work that the Treasurer has done, an extraordinary example of his craft, that is the art of illusion. Just like last year, we've got a vast collection of smoke and mirrors when it comes to this budget. This year's budget, though, will suffer exactly the same fate as last year's budget, because the illusion can only actually last for so long before the smoke clears and people actually see what's going on. And I think the smoke has already cleared on this, because people have run a million miles away from this budget. It's been very, very unpopular. Last year's wafer-thin surplus that the Treasurer promised and announced and re-promised and re-announced, and we had the Prime Minister in doing the same thing, well, that was gone before the Treasurer even finished his budget speech last year. Well, and last year that promise was of a $1.5 billion surplus, with surpluses out over the forward estimates, we were told, over the 4-year life of the budget. But instead, what we've come back with is a projected $18 billion deficit. Last year it was $19.4 billion deficit. This year, $18 billion, and on and on it's going to go. There is now no budget surplus until 2015-16, but if you believe that, you believe what Wayne Swan said last year, what the Treasurer said last year, that there was going to be a surplus. So what does this do? This all adds to the nation's debt, and that debt continues to grow and grow and grow. Now, the gross debt is likely to actually exceed $300 billion, a figure that we were told we would never ever get to, $300 billion, and it's likely to blow that limit, to burst out, and I recall the figure of $370 odd billion being announced as where we would hit peak debt. And that is atrocious, that this country is going to get that far into debt. At $300 billion, this nation's probably paying around the $12 to $13 billion a year interest bill on that, just the interest on that debt. Now that is a big number for most people to get their heads around, but it equates to about $1.5 million every hour. And that is what the taxpayers will be facing, $1.5 million every hour, every day, for the rest of the year, for the life of this government, and that figure will increase and increase as they keep on racking the debt up and up and up. Now, the Treasurer and certainly the Gillard Labor government actually started, and the Rudd Labor government before it started their time in government, with money in the bank, no net debt. Money in the bank and no net debt. And we've managed to get it to this situation that we're in right now, where the debt is growing and there is just no sign that it's going to slow down. Now, if we actually had used the money that was in the bank to spend on growth, to spend on hard infrastructure, stuff that was really needed to get the economy kicking along, it probably wouldn't have been wasted. But the fact is it has been. The fact is we haven't seen substantial funding for major projects, and I can point to the Bruce Highway as one of those key infrastructure items that has gone begging from this government. Sure, there's been some work, but I've got to tell you, it's business as usual. It's the flood maintenance stuff, it's the run-of-the-mill stuff that was left over from the and budgeted for from the Howard years. All of that's being done, but there hasn't been anything substantial. We've got places like the Epping floodplain down in Rockhampton, where my good friend, the LNP candidate for Capricornia, Michelle Landry, is certainly trying to bring some representation to that area. Now, that Epping floodplain is closed for 10 days a year on average, and no supplies can get through. 10 days when it floods, that's the time frame. Trucks can't get through, no freight, no cars. The Bruce Highway is basically shut down. We've got Gaganga Plains in my electorate of Dawson, just at the Whitsunday coast area. It actually cuts off the Whitsunday Coast Airport from the tourism area of the Whitsundays. So we've actually had situations where that area has been flooded. The planes flown in from Brisbane, and they've sat on the tarmac. We can't, probably ushered them into the the arrivals lounge. They can't go anywhere because the bus actually can't take them, or can't even get to the airport to actually pick them up and take them to the Whitsundays. So what's happened? They've actually all got back on the plane and it's flown back to Brisbane and taken them back home. And that particular area doesn't even have any planning funding allocated for it. Hasn't had any planning funding allocated to it under this government. We've got Sandy Gully a bit further north near Bowen, where there's significant flooding issues as well. We've got perhaps the biggest construction project in Northern Australia, the Abbott Point Coal Terminal expansion, about to happen. People will need to get through this section of road to actually go and work there for the construction and also for the operations. But this area floods, and floods regularly. You're not going to get the workforce through there. So it's vital that we get this area upgraded, but again, there's been no funding for that under the life of this government. The Horton River Bridge, a bit further in my electorate, also on the Bruce Highway. It is very dangerous, looks very narrow, and it feels very narrow. It's flood prone, and I've got to say, from the surveys I've conducted in my electorate, it's one of the top priority projects that people want to see sorted out by the government. But again, there's been no funding allocated to it under this government, and certainly no work done. And then, of course, there's the Mackay Ring Road. And I want to tell you a little bit about the Mackay Ring Road, Madam Deputy Speaker, because that ring road is vitally needed to get heavy vehicles off local roads in the urban area of Mackay. It will basically become the Bruce Highway bypass of Mackay. It will link the port with the industrial centre of Paget, so there's economic benefits as well with greater efficiencies and freight movements. But for the residents of Mackay, it eases the traffic congestion during the peak hours. The majority of the population in Mackay actually lives north of the Pioneer River, and we've got this situation where the employment hub is in an area called Paget, south of the river, and also in the mines, which are south and west of Mackay. So there's certainly a lot of traffic logjam. But again, there's been only minimal amount funded here. We got $10 million, which seems like a lot, but it was $10 million for a study. A study into it which started in November 2011 for completion midway through this year. They've identified a preferred route, and there's some public consultation currently underway. But once that's done, the funds run out and there's no more money to do anything else. Now, the next stage has got to be the detailed design and land resumptions. It's estimated to cost about $25 million for the detailed design and the hardship resumptions, probably $50 million, up to $50 million if you're going to do acquire the entire corridor. Now, we actually had Anthony, the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, come to Mackay, and he talked about spending potentially $50 million as part of this supposed $4.1 billion commitment that the government is now on the eve of an election saying they're going to spend over the next 10 years on the Bruce Highway. Well, hallelujah, late converts. But we go and have a look in the budget papers, and there's no money in the next financial year for it. No money from July 1st for any of these projects. Now, the Prime Minister actually come to Mackay at the end of April, and the Daily Mercury, the local newspaper, reported that under the glare of the harsh North Queensland sun and with the Daily Mercury recorder under her nose, the Prime Minister said the money for the ring road would be in the next budget. Would be in the next budget. That's what she told the Daily Mercury. Less than 3 weeks later, we had the Treasurer bring down a budget with no funding for the ring road in it. Certainly not for next financial year. Another broken promise for this government. But Curiously, we've had all these people, the Labor candidate in my area, the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, had he did a damage control trip to Mackay about this, and he flew in, and the journalist said, is this in the budget for 2013-14? He said, oh, it's in the budget. It's in the budget. He wouldn't say the words for 2013-14. He wouldn't have dared say that, and he dived and he dodged and he danced around that particular answer. And I've got to tell you why, because it's been found out actually today in Senate estimates. The Department of Infrastructure and Transport's Mike Medak was before the estimates committee there, and he told the answer about this whole Bruce Highway funding package. And they asked him for probably about 15 minutes, various different questions about this Bruce Highway funding package and what was going to be funded when, and there was, again, just like the Minister, a lot of diving and dancing, but the truth came out. The truth came out that it split into two different parts, $1.844 billion that's going to be funded from 2014-15 to 2018-19, and $1.09 billion in 2019-20 to 2022-23. The remainder of the funds are actually being spent this year on projects that have already been announced. Projects that have already been announced. And the Ring Road, and none of those projects that I mentioned before, is one of them. So it actually is about $1.2 billion less than what they said. And more to the point, there is no funding for 13-14. Surprise, surprise. Even though the Labor candidate in my electorate, the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, has been trying to pull the wool over people's eyes and tell them that funding is there. But the facts are the funding doesn't happen until 14-15. And I'm a Doctor Who fan, so unless the Minister actually has a TARDIS that he can transport funding back in time with, it is an impossibility. It's not happening. So they have been caught out badly with this lie that's been told to the people of Mackay that there's going to be funding for the Ring Road in this budget next financial year. We were told that by the Prime Minister when she visited Mackay in April, and then we find out now Senate estimates has brought out the truth. The funding is not there. It has been such a massive con job, but they are now exposed, well and truly exposed for this fabrication. There is more than the Ring Road and more than the Bruce Highway that needs to be done in the electorate of Dawson, and that we don't see any funding for in this. They're not big ticket items, they're not pork barrelling. They are just things that definitely need to be done. And the Don River is one of those things that need to be fixed. It is a river which doesn't flow much, but when it flows, boy doesn't it. And if you get some downpour, you are going to get some serious flooding that's going to wipe out the community of Queens Beach and a lot of the agricultural crops that we have around that community. And it's a problem waiting to happen. There's a plan that the council's undertaking, a study that will come out with some recommendations of how to actually fix it. We need to have some funding on the table for natural disaster mitigation to do projects on problem areas such as this, so we do not have that disaster. We need to get that funding and get it going before it is too late. Now, North Queensland produces an enormous amount of wealth for the entire nation, and we just can't seem to get the infrastructure out of government that we require to get on with the job producing more of that wealth. We do not get our fair share. This government, I would have hoped, would have put up another regional development funding round before the election. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. And unfortunately, Mackay Gymnastics is going to miss out. They've applied in the past for a measly $750,000 for a facility for them. Meanwhile, Geelong Cats gets $10 million for a stadium, you know, that real small rural centre of Geelong. The Geelong Cats in the AFL comp, National AFL comp, getting $10 million. Meanwhile, a poor little gymnastics club gets nothing. And that situation I want to see reversed, and I've got a petition that I'm going to be presenting to the House in the next coming week. But look, we've got to be focused on what counts. This government's too busy focused on leadership, on appeasing the Greens, buying votes, and they've dropped the ball and lost control. We need the strong economy restored. The only way that can happen is through the coalition.